The hero will burn the important math answers with a fire, and Professor Lambo rushed forward regardless of the danger. Seeing Lambo's embarrassed look, Will felt a little guilty. For the genius Will, this difficult problem is as simple as basic arithmetic. But Lambo's math ability is always inferior to Will's, and he feels sorry that this young man is wasting his talent. In fact, Will has a reason for doing this. Before meeting Lambo, Will needed Chucky to pick him up every morning and then go to the construction site to move bricks together. At night, Will worked part-time as a cleaner at MIT. One day, Will found a math problem on the blackboard and solved it easily. He didn't know that this was an advanced Fourier formula. There are only a few people in the world who can solve it. At first, Lambo didn't take it seriously, thinking it was just a prank by a student who didn't know his own abilities. Until he saw the completely correct answer on the blackboard with his own eyes. Lambo instantly realized that another genius had appeared in the world's top Massachusetts Institute of Technology, because Lambo had promised before that whoever could solve this problem before the end of the semester. Not only could he get the highest credits of the semester, but he would also be permanently named in MIT. Unexpectedly, the equation was solved in just one day. The next day, the usually deserted math classroom was full. Everyone wanted to see what this math genius looked like. As a result, when Lambo asked him to stand up, no one in the classroom answered. Helpless Lambo had to challenge again. It was a math problem that he and his colleagues spent 2 years to solve. At this time, Will, just because he saw the guy who bullied him before. He got off the car without hesitation and topped the gangster who bullied him severely with his good buddies. Will didn't stop until the other party was knocked to the ground. The patrolman saw it and rushed forward to stop it, but Will, who lost control of his emotions, kicked the policeman directly. In the end, although he was released by the police station, he was charged with assaulting the police and will go to court in a few days. However, Will was not worried because this kind of thing was already common to Will. That night, seeing the new questions on the blackboard, Will gave the best solution without thinking. At this time, Lambo, who happened to pass by, found Will. Thinking that Will, who was a cleaner, was destroying the problem, Lambo hurried forward to stop him, and Will, who was discovered, turned around and left. Lambo wanted to catch up with him and criticize him severely, but he lost his trace at just a corner. When he returned to the blackboard, he was surprised to find that Will's answer was exactly the same. Fearing that Lambo would complain, Will took the initiative to resign. He usually spent time with his friends, and the eyes of the four of them all showed confusion about life. The next day, Lambo found the cleaning department through clues and found Will's contact information here. At this time, Will was being interrogated in court. He did not hire a lawyer because he had already memorized the legal provisions of the United States. With just one word from Will, the opposing lawyer and the judge were speechless. Various cases of acquittal in history became Will's evidence in court at this moment. Obviously, this was not the first time he stood here. Lambo was deeply impressed by the scene, and his face was full of admiration that could not be suppressed. However, Will was not lucky this time. It took the judge dozens of minutes to read through his criminal record. Fighting, stealing, and damaging vehicles, impersonating police, violent attacks, and what is even more surprising is that so many records were all found not guilty. This time, the judge ignored Will's testimony and sentenced him to jail with a bail of $50,000 and no defense. If no one is willing to help, the high bail and countless criminal records. Will spend the best years of his youth in prison. Fortunately, Lambo is willing to lend a hand, and he made a condition that Will cannot refuse. That is, under his supervision, Will can be released from prison. But there must be 2 prerequisites. The first is that he must do some math problems with Lambo every week. The second is that he needs to see a psychologist every week. Although Will is very resistant to psychologists, it is much better than being in prison here. Will, who regained his freedom, did not disappoint Lambo. No matter how difficult or complicated the math problem is, he can give the best solution after a simple moment of thinking. Lambo is very satisfied with his math, but he finds the psychologist difficult. Before the first psychologist had even talked to him for a few words, Will revealed his sexual orientation. The psychologist lost control of his emotions due to anger. It turned out that Will had read his biography the day before and confirmed his sexual orientation problem from his language and behavior between the lines. Just a few words made the psychologist leave in anger. Next, Lambo changed 4 psychologists for him. But the final result was the same. Will left in anger. In desperation, Lambo could only find his college roommate Sean, who was a psychology teacher in a school. Sean initially refused to take over the problem of psychotherapy. Even though Lambo kept emphasizing that Will was a rare talent, Sean remained indifferent. Until Lambo said that he and Sean were from the same area and had similar childhood experiences, Sean agreed. Seeing that he had changed people again, Will still had a bad face. He ignored the 3 Lambos who stood up to greet him and sat down on the sofa. Will was eager to end this treatment. Then, before Sean could say anything, Will began to take the initiative and look around the room. Either he answered Sean's questions irrelevantly, or he tried every means to refuse to answer Sean's questions. Seeing the books on the bookshelf in his room, Will denounced these books as worthless. Sean just agreed and didn't say anything, so Will became more and more excessive. Then he commented on Sean's paintings, which were also rubbish. Sean didn't care and humbly asked him what was wrong, until Will mentioned his wife and said that he married the wrong woman. This seemed to touch Sean's bottom line, but Will seemed to have found a breakthrough point. He continued to speak rudely to Sean's wife, but Sean suddenly grabbed Will's neck. Will was also shocked by what he saw because the previous psychiatrist would just leave directly. Unexpectedly, Sean directly expressed his anger, and Will's plan succeeded again. Seeing Will's smug look, Lambo knew that this psychotherapy failed again. But unexpectedly, Sean did not give up, but asked to continue at the same time next week. Will was right about one thing. He said that Sean was in a violent storm, and the waves hit the boat, and the oars were about to break. He urgently needed a port to get out of the current situation. But that was just one part of Sean's life. As soon as Will came in on Thursday, Sean planned to take him outside to talk. Then, the two went to the park and sat by the river. At first, Will was as cynical as before, but Sean's next words touched his soul. Will was just a child who spoke without restraint. When talking about art, Will would probably bring up the superficial arguments of art books. But Will couldn't tell the smell of the church in the book. When talking about women, Will might list some exaggerated preferences, but he has never experienced the happiness of waking up with a beautiful woman next to him. When it comes to war, Will can talk about Shakespeare's sonnets, but he has never felt the sorrow of his comrades dying in front of him. He has never experienced the pain of losing his loved ones. Although Sean has read Oliver Twist, he still cannot summarize Will based on the book knowledge. Unless Will is willing to open his heart, Sean can really know Will. This is the first time that Will has been seen so clearly by someone, and finally someone has spoken to his heart. However, Will did not give in easily. During the next treatment, Will became silent. And Sean did not say a word either, and now he had to wait for Will to speak first. The two of them waited until the time was up every time. Until this day, Will finally broke the silence and told a joke to Sean, who was about to fall asleep. His move to break the deadlock was actually to ask Sean for advice on emotional issues. Will met a girl in a Harvard bar some time ago. I still remember that night, Chucky pretended to be a history student and chatted with a woman, but was deliberately exposed by a student from the same school. His way was to use professional knowledge to make things difficult. The originally cheerful atmosphere became very awkward. At this time, Will, who was not happy with it, came over. He stood directly between the two of them and repeated the other party's point of view word for word. Then, he summarized the content that the other party would learn in the next few years, as well as the course catalog and homework. Even the syllabus was blurted out directly. The other party wanted to refute, but Will interrupted him directly and stated the other party's point of view in advance. He even remembered clearly which page the point of view was on. Everyone around was shocked by his words. However, the Harvard diploma was the other party's last stubbornness. He mocked Will that he could only be a street vendor in the future. Will directly suggested that if we felt unhappy, we could go outside. One sentence made the other party sober up instantly and then hurriedly returned to his corner in a huff. Will easily calmed the matter down, and this also attracted the girl's attention. It was not until 45 minutes later, before she left the bar, that she said to this unromantic guy, "I waited for you for 45 minutes, but you were indifferent." Skylar took the initiative to give Will her number. Will, who was about to go home, found that the guy just now was flirting with girls in the dessert shop again. So he walked up directly and mocked the other party for only being worthy of eating donuts here, and he had already got Skylar's number. Since then, Will started dating Skylar, and he also tasted the taste of love for the first time. But in order to maintain the perfection presented with Skylar, he did not dare to make a new appointment with her. Even if he called in the rain, he hung up without saying a word. Sean thought Will was a complete layman. What Will called to keep Skylar perfect was actually just to avoid destroying his own perfection. In Sean's opinion, this is a philosophy. Not contacting anyone for a lifetime can indeed keep the first impression perfect. Then Sean told Will a joke. His wife would fart when she was nervous, especially when she was sleeping at night. One day, the sound was so loud that it woke up the dog in the yard. After waking herself up with the stink, his wife also pushed all the problems to Sean. These words made both of them laugh. Sean knows all the little problems of his wife, and so does his wife. People call it imperfection, but it is not true. No one in the world is perfect. The question is whether the two can match perfectly. Will asked Sean if he had ever thought about remarrying, but Sean deliberately avoided the question. Will seize the opportunity and return Sean's preaching to him. Sean can live the rest of his life without contacting anyone like Will. At this moment, they miraculously reached a tacit understanding. Sean did not respond, but just said that the time was up. This time, Will actually forgot the time while chatting. But no matter what, he still followed Sean's advice. After untying his knot, Will came to Skylar's school and took the first step. Unfortunately, she still had homework to do, and Skylar planned to make another appointment with Will tomorrow. Will was eager to finish Skylar's homework as quickly as possible and then return to the dormitory to hand it to Skylar. During the date, Skylar asked Will about his family problems. In order to cover up his identity as an orphan, Will lied that he had 12 brothers. Skylar planned to meet these people, and Will could only reluctantly agree. In the next treatment meeting, Will asked Sean what his life would be like if he had not met his wife. And Sean deliberately understood that if he had not met her, would his life be better? Sean answered this question seriously and meaningfully. He stood up and described an important baseball game vividly. His excitement infected Will, and he was also impressed by the game of the century. But Sean's next words made Will unbelievable. Because he met his wife, Sean gave up the rare opportunity to enter the stadium. However, even so, he did not regret it. He did not regret missing the game because of his wife, and did not regret giving up psychological counseling because of his wife's illness. He did not regret accompanying his wife for several years after her serious illness. Sean's correct outlook on life impressed Will, and at the same time completely narrowed the distance between the two. On the other hand, Will's work at MIT was very smooth. Those difficult math problems that others had to rack their brains for became so simple in his hands. Seeing that Will's condition was getting better and better, Lambo found Sean, hoping to discuss his future plans with Will as soon as possible. Many places that need Will to display his mathematical talent are eagerly waiting for him. However, Sean thinks that the time is not right yet. Lambo is a little eager for quick success and hopes that Will can show his talent as soon as possible. Even though Sean firmly opposes Lambo's approach, Lambo has arranged for Will to interview for a job. But what Lambo never expected was that the person who went to the interview was Will's friend Chucky. And Will was enjoying his leisure time outside with Skylar. Whenever Skylar wanted to meet Will's 12 brothers, Will began to prevaricate with various reasons. Will was afraid that Skylar would break up on the spot after seeing his shabby little house and his pitiful life experience. Even with a genius mind that surpasses everyone, Will can hardly transcend the inferiority engraved in his bones. Sometimes he is extremely sensitive, even if it is just a joke from Skylar. It may also make Will's nerves tense at any time, inferiority complex, and make Will suffer from paranoia. He began to suspect that he was just a toy of Skylar, a transitional boyfriend. His genius, poverty, and legend will add some color to Skylar's life. But Skylar, as a rich girl, will abandon him sooner or later. Eventually marry a successful person, and then the two will tell his jokes together late at night. So, when Skylar proposed that Will go to California with him to study in medical school, Will flatly refused. He was afraid of change and afraid of relocation. Because since he was abandoned by his parents in childhood, he has been sent to foster families 4 times, and 3 of them were severely abused. In Will's heart, changing places is a terrible thing. But what he fears most is that time will make Skylar discover his shortcomings. Then Will be unloved and abandoned again. Unfortunately, Will can't say these. Skylar thinks Will cares too much about her money. However, Skylar lost her parents when she was 13 years old. She wanted to return the inheritance every day when she woke up. She only wanted her parents to stay with her for 1 more day. The difference is that Skylar chose to face her life head-on. In contrast, Will was always cowardly. He was afraid that no one loved him, but so was Skylar. At least she was very honest. The two had a fierce argument, and finally Will turned around and left despite Skylar's desperate pleas. Skylar was left alone to be torn apart by love. She couldn't believe that Will could say, "I don't love you," so easily. The next day, Lambo questioned Will's latest answer, and Will just told him that it was right. When he learned that Will did not go to the interview, Lambo expressed his dissatisfaction. Because he did so much, Will did not feel grateful at all. The angry Will began to fight back. For him, these questions were as simple as basic arithmetic. He didn't need anyone to guide his life, nor did he need anyone to control and give him charity. Will lit the answer on fire and then threw it on the ground like garbage. Lambo rushed forward without hesitation. He couldn't bear to watch the precious answer being burned. He often wished he hadn't met Will, so he wouldn't feel so humble. But what Lambo regretted more was Will's behavior of wasting his talent. In this way, the relationship between Will and Lambo completely deteriorated. During the next treatment, Sean asked Will if he had a soul mate. Unfortunately, it hit Will, who had just pushed Skylar away. Will tried to bring up those great men who had passed away, and it was obvious that he didn't have a soul mate. Sean used this to ask Will to take the first step to open his heart, hoping that he could prove what he wanted. Sean understood that he went to MIT not to clean, but because of his inner drive. However, when Sean asked Will what he wanted, he used the same trick to avoid the question. The perfunctory answer was that he just wanted to be a shepherd. When Sean heard this, he didn't want to waste any more words. He got up and chose to open the door to see him off. Will didn't understand why he did that. Whenever Will felt uneasy, he would turn into a hedgehog and attack everyone around him in self-defense. But Sean had already seen it clearly. Will was just like when he faced Skylar, he always deliberately concealed and was not frank enough. Before Skylar left here, Will called her again. Skylar said, "I love you" to him again. Will was very happy, and he loved Skylar too. But the final reply was take care. Until the end, Will still failed to surpass himself. Skylar could not understand all this and could only leave the city with disappointment. Everything seemed to have returned to the starting point, and Will thought that maybe it didn't matter if his life passed like this. At least his heart would never be hurt again. After learning that Will not only gave up the subsequent interviews, but was so timid that he didn't even keep his girlfriend. Chucky told him some sincere words. If Will and Chucky were still moving bricks on the construction site 20 years later, Chucky would be deeply saddened because Will had a $1 million lottery ticket that Chucky didn't even have, but he was cowardly and didn't dare to realize it. Chucky went to Will's house every day to pick him up to go out for drinks and play around, which was fine. But Chucky felt that the best moment of the day was the 10 seconds when he parked the car on the side of the road and walked to the door of Will's house. Every time Chucky knocked on the door, Will was not at home, and he did not need to say goodbye and just left without a word. Do what Will wants to do and realize his own value. Will was stunned and could not say a word. When Lambo learned that Sean had driven Will away, he felt incredible. This means that Will continue to waste his time with bad friends. But Sean knows better than anyone why Will wasted his talent and fell into depravity. The main reason is that he gained friendship in this way. The friendship of the three good friends is the only relationship that supports and accepts him in this world for many years. Because the first thing Will encountered when he was born was to be abandoned. Abandoned by the group of people who loved him the most, once he realized that others might leave. Will would drive the other party away first, which is a defense mechanism. Will was lonely for 20 years because of this. If Lambo continues to press step by step, everything will repeat the same mistakes. However, Lambo didn't think so. He would never allow Will to waste his talent. And Sean would never allow Lambo to ruin Will's life. The two quarreled over this, and their quarrel became more and more intense. Will opened the door at the right time, and Lambo calmed down when he saw him coming back. Turned away without saying a word, leaving time for them. Will, who heard the content of the quarrel, was very grateful for Sean's behavior. And Sean was holding the information about Will in his hand. There were photos of Will being abused by his foster family during his childhood. These deepest fears dominated him all the time. And Sean seemed to have the same experience. His inhumane, alcoholic father wanted to abuse him every time he came home. In order to protect his mother and brother, Sean always deliberately provoked his alcoholic father. So he could understand what Will's childhood was like, and Will's heart was finally opened a little. He also began to tell Sean about those tragic experiences. After listening to Will's story, Sean began to approach Will step by step. At the same time, Sean told Will over and over again, "It's not your fault to experience these." At first, Will was still very resistant, but after Sean said it was not your fault 11 times in a row, finally broke through Will's psychological defense, and then he lay on Sean's shoulder and cried bitterly. In 20 years, Will has never cried so heartily. Sean has patience and courage to help this confused life. Found the right way to open it. The experience did not bury Will's talent, but wiped out his self-confidence. The scared Will was arrogant and relied on his way to protect himself and refuted everything harshly. And now someone finally told Will that it was not his fault. From then on, Will had only infinite sunshine waiting for him. After a night of thinking, Will accepted the job that Lambo introduced to him. Will was as humble as an ordinary applicant, without cynicism or pretense. In this way, Will's psychotherapy was coming to an end. He was a little reluctant and hoped to keep in touch with Sean. Sean was happy, but planned to go out for a trip first, because Sean decided to bet on his life again and find a second spring for his life. At this moment, the two of them completed mutual redemption, and it happened to be Will's 21st birthday. Friends specially used the money they saved to prepare a big gift for him. An old car with an ugly appearance, but equipped with an inline six-cylinder engine. As for Lambo and Sean, both of them were doing it for Will's good, and there was no deep hatred. Two old friends, meeting and laughing to forget their grudges, are still lifelong friends. That day, Chucky came to pick up Will to go to work as usual. But he knocked on the door for a long time without getting a response, so he leaned on the window and looked inside. Only then did he find that the inside was already clean, and Chucky suddenly realized that the young man was really gone. Then Chucky was relieved, because Will finally left here to find his true value. He was sincerely happy for Will, while Sean packed his luggage and prepared to start his journey. Will drove downstairs and looked at his mentor who helped him find himself. He was full of gratitude and then quietly put a letter in the mailbox and then drove away. Sean found something strange here. He went downstairs and saw the open mailbox. The letter said, "Say sorry to Lambo for me. Put your work aside for now. You can give up the baseball game for the girl you love. I don't want to regret it either." Will finally figured it out. He was going to California to find the girl he hurt. Good Will Hunting is directed by Gus Van Sant, starring Matt Damon and Robin Williams, a drama film released in 1997. Will closed himself off due to childhood trauma and learned to use rebellion to cover up his vulnerability. Just like the survivor paradox in psychology, those who have survived hardships are often smarter and more sensitive than ordinary people. But this sensitivity also makes them more sensitive to hurt. The film uses the quarrel between Will and Skylar to reveal the truth. True intimacy is not about solving problems, but about allowing the other person to see the cold sweat and miscalculated draft paper when solving problems. When Will finally hugged Sean and cried, we realized that true healing is not to eliminate the wound, but to allow someone to touch the flesh under the scab. Well, today's movie sharing ends here. Welcome to like, comment, and forward. Thank you for watching, patiently looking forward to meeting you next time.